Hi, everyone. I am Pearl Small. I'm a reporter here at News Center, Maine, and I'm here with our political reporter, Phil Hirschkorn. Phil, I don't really cover a lot of politics, but I'm going to play kind of the viewer-voter perspective here and just kind of ask you some questions about the 2026 elections. And we're going to start with, we have 2 House seats in Congress up for re-election. You wanted to start with CD2, right?
Well, that's where the news is. More of the news, anyway.
Okay. And so we can start with, do we want to start talking about Jared Golden and how he recently just dropped out of the race?
Sure. Well, that was just about 10 days ago, I think. Really a surprise to almost everyone in Maine and around the country, because Maine CD2 is one of the few real swing seats, because our maps are so gerrymandered all over the country, certainly in the states that have more than 2 seats. Ours aren't gerrymandered, but CD2 is generally more conservative than CD1. Harder for a Democrat to win, but Golden's done it 4 times. The fact that he's a military veteran, he signed up as a teenager after 9/11 to join the Marines, was deployed in Iraq, Afghanistan. That's a big part of his political identity, and plays well, of course, anywhere, but especially in CD2. And he's been more of a moderate voting record compared to National Democrats. He kind of is an enigma for National Democrats because he defies the party so often, maybe 20% of the time. He doesn't vote with what leadership would like the party to do, but he's survived, and he's gotten more votes in different elections than Donald Trump, than Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden. He gets high marks for bipartisanship. He likes to work with Republicans across the aisle. This is part of his profile. He faced a daunting re-election campaign against former Republican Governor Paul LePage. And people not only remember LePage, they remember he tried a comeback in 2022 against Governor Janet Mills after sort of retiring to Florida, and he got shellacked. I mean, he lost by 13%, obviously not even close. But LePage won in CD2. So even though he's sort of semi-retired to Florida again, now he's 76, LePage is the lone Republican in that race, and would have been a more formidable opponent for Golden than some others. But that's not why Golden got out. Golden got out, he says, because he just doesn't like the job, right? He talked about polarization. He talked about the nastiness. He talked about the incivility. And surprising for some people, he talked about violence in our politics, whether it was the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, the attempted assassinations of President Trump. We've had Minnesota legislators be shot and killed, and other incidents all over the country. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, his house, the governor's mansion, was firebombed earlier this year. So Golden himself has faced personal threats. It's not a secret. In fact, he told me right here in News Center, Maine last year when he was here for his congressional debate that he carries a gun all the time when he leaves his house, a small gun, for protection purposes. Never mind what he keeps in his home to protect his family. So he's fed up. He doesn't want to do it anymore. But it was a big surprise still when he announced it.
Yeah. It made me think about, because I remember when he was up against Austin Terrio, and that was pretty close. And I was thinking, would Austin Terrio run again now that Golden's out?
That's what a lot of people thought. He was 31, former NASCAR driver, one-term state legislator, did surprisingly well based on those sort of thinner credentials than other people that Golden had beaten. But he stepped aside for Paul LePage. He's on Team LePage. He's endorsed LePage, and whether his arm got twisted to do that or he just felt like he was one and done and didn't enjoy the experience, I don't know. I haven't talked to him. But Golden certainly faced another tough race. He could have raised the money, and he said he wasn't afraid of losing. He was afraid of winning and having to go back to Washington and have those long separations during the week from his family. He and his wife have 2 little girls. They're 1 and 4, and no one likes to be away from their family. So he cited that as a reason as well. But it just seems like he is a member of the minority party. You're always playing defense. You're always trying to stop things. You're not as much trying to get things done. He was the lone Democrat to vote to keep the government open against the shutdown in the House. He took a lot of heat for that. He voted against some big bills during the Biden years, took some heat for that. But that works in the 2nd District, where Donald Trump has won 3 times in a row. So he's kind of like Susan Collins, statewide and as a member of the Republican Party, has had to walk a tightrope politically and watch his left flank and his right flank. For the first time, he faced a primary challenge. And I guess now we're going to segue to where the race goes from here. Matt Dunlap, who a lot of people know, is our Secretary of State for a long time, high-profile job. He's now the state auditor, low-profile job, but important. He was once a state legislator himself. He's 60 years old. He lives in Old Town, and he announced that he would challenge Golden before Golden dropped out. That's not why Golden dropped out. I think Golden was confident he could beat Dunlap, but I think automatically Dunlap's now the front runner for that seat on the Democratic side, though he has company.
And tell me about, what do you know about Dunlap?
Well, I got to know him even before I moved to Maine and started covering politics, because as Secretary of State, he made a name for himself nationally, in particular being against Real ID, which finally has happened, right? In Maine, everyone had to get appointments at DMV and get new driver's licenses. He raised certain privacy concerns that a lot of people had with that. But he was also, a big advocate for keeping our elections, as they say, fair and free and easy. We have very high voter registration. And like his successor, Shenna Bellows, I think it can be said fairly, he has stood up for maintaining the rules as they are. Expanding absentee voting, which soared in popularity during the pandemic, keeping same-day registration, and a lot of the methods we have in Maine that make voting pretty easy and make us a very high turnout state. So he was known for that as Secretary of State. It's not exactly clear what his policy disagreements were with Golden, but I think it had to do more with, again, Golden being a more moderate, independent Democrat, where I think we'll hear from Dunlap him stake out positions that are a little more left-leaning, if I can put it that way, maybe more in line with some of the national Democrats. He's really done little more than announce that he's running. He hasn't really started campaigning yet. But there is another candidate in the race.
He just announced, right?
Well, we broke the news on News Center Maine that Jordan Wood, and you might say, well, who's Jordan Wood? And that's kind of the point. Jordan Wood has been running a little low profile in terms of publicity for the U.S. Senate. Yeah. He was actually the first candidate to get in the race on the Democratic side before Graham Plattner, who's made a much bigger splash, both statewide and nationally. Jordan Wood started in April. He's a former congressional staffer, who's worked in Washington for a decade, both as a chief of staff to a California congresswoman. He also worked on campaign finance reform. He led a group called End Citizens United. Citizens United being that famous, or some would say infamous, Supreme Court decision that basically said money is speech and allows corporations and unions to spend as much as they want independently on our political races. So he's been around. He's only 36, which is young for running for Congress, for being in Congress. I think there's only two members of Congress, of the Senate anyway, under 40. And not that many in the House either. So he is now in that race against Matt Dunlap, and others may join.
Right. Still some time there. Are there any independent candidates that have?
There could be, but they wouldn't have a primary in June, so we don't know yet. And on the Republican side, it's just Paul LePage, as I mentioned. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but certainly some of our gubernatorial candidates on the Democratic side, like Troy Jackson, the former state Senate president, he lives in the district up in Aroostook County. Shenna Bellows, who I just mentioned, our Secretary of State, she lives in the district in the Augusta area, the 2nd Congressional District. Now, they're both running, focused on running for governor, but I'm confident that they're considering the possibility of switching to the House race. Troy Jackson actually ran for that seat a long time ago in the 2010s, and it's not inconceivable he could pivot, because the Democratic primary field for governor is very competitive and has 3 or 4 or 5 pretty well-known people in it. Besides them,
do you think because part of Golden's appeal was being like a moderate Democrat, that if a lot of the other candidates are, more left-leaning, that could shift some of the votes that would typically go to Golden?
Well, that's the risk. I mean, I think it's reasonable to say that Jackson, who's sort of in the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party, in fact, when Bernie Sanders came to town on Labor Day, the two featured speakers locally were Troy Jackson and Graham Plattner. It was Plattner's sort of first big speech, and for Troy it was a big speech with 6,500 people in the audience down at the Cross Insurance Arena. And, he's a fight the oligarchy fire-breathing, politician. And so yes, he's definitely left of golden. I mean, these labels sometimes don't explain the whole picture, right?
Right.
And just as saying I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat doesn't always explain the whole picture of who you are. But it is a shorthand, and Troy Jackson's record speaks for itself. He's for Medicare for all. He's for raising the minimum wage. I mean, some of these are sort of boilerplate Democratic Party positions. Some of them are maybe more left than where Golden is, and perhaps we'll see where some of the second district voters are. Bellows has also a pretty liberal record, staking out positions. She ran against Susan Collins many years ago, before she was a state legislator herself. Her issue would be, among other things, she's sort of aroused the enmity of Republicans because as Secretary of State, she disqualified Trump from the presidential primary ballot in 2024, saying he had incited an insurrection.
I remember that.
It was the same exact reasoning as the Supreme Court of Colorado. And it was the Colorado case that went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court said, oh, no, we don't really think the 14th Amendment applies here. Yeah. And Trump was on all the primary ballots, the general election ballot, and now he's president again. But I don't think Republicans in the second CD have forgiven her for that.
Right.
Or will.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, do we want to talk about CD1 now?
Sure,
then?
Sure.
So I was kind of under the impression that Shelley Pingree's Democratic primary seat was pretty safe because I had seen that she hadn't been challenged in the primary since 2008. That's true, right?
I trust you on that one. I
so
know,
what's different now, though?
Well, I think a lot of people are coming out of the woodwork because our politics are so chaotic. And I think, in chaos comes opportunity. You're probably right about the primary thing, but the bigger picture is she's been the congressperson since 2008. That's when she first won. So she's in her 9th term. She'll be going for 10 in 2026. She's won easily. You have to look up year by year who's gotten bigger votes, her or Angus King, in terms of, I don't want to say the most popular politician in Maine, but the biggest wins in Maine. And she's right up there. She's won re-election easily, time and time again. She does have, for now, a primary challenge. There's a state legislator, Tiffany Roberts, who's from Berwick, who's been in Augusta for, I think, 4 terms. She's also a digital marketing business owner. Like everyone in Augusta, the job doesn't pay full time, so you either have to be retired, have money in the bank, or have another job. And she's in the latter category. She just announced last week that she wants to run for the seat. In her announcement, she didn't say really that many things that were anti-Pingree, just the things that she was for and why she wants to seek the seat. So that's a primary challenge. She talked about investments in things that she thinks are important. She said apprenticeships, trades, community college programs, things that employers need as an employer herself. So that's how she's starting out. Tiffany Roberts, state legislator. So we'll see. I think, Pingree's office would say, well, let's see if she actually gets on the ballot, right? All of this is just talk.
Yeah.
Until January, when people
and
have
why would she maybe not get on the ballot?
Well, you have to get a petition, and you're not even allowed to gather signatures till January, and there's a 2-month window. All these races, governor, Senate, House, and so it's all talk until they actually do that. Sometimes people don't make it on the ballot. It's not super hard, but it's thousands of signatures, depending on the race. And so, you've got to do that work. And that's certainly a small threshold you have to get over. So she'd have to do that.
And I guess now we know some people, well, at least I know that some people drop out before they even get to see if they made it on the ballot. Because we just had Eric Small drop out he was going to run for the Republican primary for this.
Right, the Stanford police chief, Eric Small, said he was going to, as a Republican, would challenge Pingree and hope to be her opponent in the general election. And now he says, no, I'm not going to do that. He's now going to run for state legislature.
Does that happen a lot?
Well, like I said, it's all talk until you show me the signatures and get on the ballot. He's getting behind Ron Russell, who was the general election candidate in 2024 that Pingree beat pretty easily, 60% to 40%. He's someone who was in the military for 30 years and was a defense contractor for 15 years after that. And if you read interviews with him or watch interviews with him, he's pretty standard Republican, Trumpy Republican kind of person. The positions he stakes out, more energy, development, drill baby drill, as they like to say. He talks about the Second Amendment. He's anti-abortion. Not unusual positions for a Republican candidate to have. He says he's going to make another run, so we'll see.
Yeah, and there's some other candidates too that have announced already, or just a couple others, I think.
You probably know their names and I don't. But
I have them written down. That's why I know their names. I don't know anything about them.
I need to look them up.
Andrew Piantadosi and Joshua Dupree.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to look them up and next time maybe give them their due.
Yeah.
But, a lot of unknown, everyone's unknown until they're known, right? Like Jordan Wood, no one ever heard of until he started running. And even after 6 months of campaigning, he's not super well known, right? Polling in the single digits. So it's not easy to come out of nowhere without holding an elective office prior and running for an office as prominent as Congress.
So it's kind of too soon to tell who would be like the lead in any of these.
Right. Races. And I would actually say don't even put too much faith in the polling, even in such a high-profile race as our U.S. Senate race. The polling's been going on. As we speak, there's a new poll out this morning that Politico has published on the Senate race, where we have Janet Mills and Graham Plattner and Susan Collins. And the poll, just for what it's worth, suggests that Plattner wouldn't be as strong a general election candidate against Susan Collins as he would argue that he is. Yeah. And it says he does even worse when in the questioning, and polls don't always work this way, because poll questions try to be neutral, but in the questioning, when the pollster tells the voter about his past Reddit posts, those insulting, offensive Reddit posts that he had deleted but were unearthed and magically appeared in all these publications the day after Janet Mills got in the race.
Does the vote go down then?
It gets even worse.
Oh,
so he loses to Collins and loses worse when voters are informed about those negative stories about him. What a shock. So,
because sometimes publicity can work the other way.
Yeah, look at Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I mean, look what he endured. In 2016, all kinds of negative stories, accusations about misbehavior by various women, the infamous Access Hollywood tape where he said some pretty crude things about women, and then fast forward to 2024, where he won re-election in spite, for instance, being a convicted felon.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like it works that way with Democratic candidates, at least from what I've seen.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you have to go back some years and compare where we are today to when things used to be disqualifying. Just to give you an ancient history example that people in Maine remember is Ed Muskie was, our famous legendary governor and then senator, and was a running mate in 1968 for vice president with Hubert Humphrey. And they lost. And so when 1972 came around, he was considered a front runner for the presidential nomination. And the story goes that he was in the New Hampshire primary campaigning one cold, wintry afternoon, and there were snowflakes, and he was responding to a harsh editorial that had been published in the Manchester Union Leader. And I believe I'm correct in saying it insulted his wife, and he was responding to that. And it was widely reported that he teared up. Oh. He teared up. And, of course, men can't cry, right? Men couldn't even hug back then either. This is 1972. So that was kind of the beginning of the end of Muskie's campaign. I think he even won the New Hampshire primary, but not by as much as was expected. And anyway, that was the beginning of the end of the Muskie campaign. That was disqualifying, shedding a tear. Then you fast forward to Bill Clinton in 1992, and then afterward, accusations about womenizing. Of course, we had the impeachment over his White House affair with an intern. That had come out during. If he had to run for a re-election again, I don't know if he would have won. Of course, he was already safely in his second term. There was a candidate before Clinton, Gary Hart, a popular senator from Colorado. In 1988, he was photographed with a woman, not his wife, sitting on his lap on a boat in the Bahamas. Bad. That's bad. So that was disqualifying. Yeah. And we could go on and on and on. Joe Biden.
I guess there's a fine line between what would disqualify you and what would just get your name out there more.
Exactly. Joe Biden, who obviously was our president in 1988, he was also a front runner back in those days, and he plagiarized a speech by an English politician. And then people were like, oh wait, Neil Kinnock from the Labour Party in England just made that speech. And people put that together, and Biden was forced to end his presidential campaign over cribbing a few words from another politician not even in this country. So yes, to your point, people endure now old Reddit posts, Nazi tattoo, problems with, mistreating women, all of the above, and who knows what else, and they survive, they endure, and they even win. So some would say our standards are lower as a country. Some would say maybe we've grown up.
Yeah.
Maybe we're more like Europe, we're more tolerant. Yeah. I don't know. But, I'm sure we'll hear more unknown things about Graham Platter. Maybe we'll hear something crazy about Janet Mills, who everyone's known in Maine for decades. Who knows?
I guess we'll see.
Politics, like life, is full of surprises.
I guess we'll see who gets their name out there in, the congressional races, and then I'll talk more to you soon about the governor's races and all the other ones. All right. Thank you.